everyone. Welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
So I've been thinking a lot about independence, like being an independent person. Not like the independence of our country, but like
right.
as an individual.
Because that's a little bit of a hot button right now, and I just don't know if I feel like doing the dive.
Do you want to hop into a history lesson? No, I was just thinking about being people who are very independent, and I always feel like I'm very independent.
Yeah, I am too.
And the way I've been noticing that I'm maybe extra independent or overly independent is I've been I'll find myself saying no to people who want to help me.
Oh,
for no really good reason.
Okay, I say this in love. Yes,
Okay.
you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Right.
And so do I. Same thing.
And so then I was thinking about it, is that a good trait actually? To me, I've always felt like being independent is a super good trait.
Yeah.
I'm super self-reliant. I don't need nobody to help me out.
Yeah, exactly.
It does for me, I think bring an amount of confidence. I have this idea that no matter what, I can do okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
If I was thrown into the woods, I could also survive and be okay because I'm super independent like that.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a very good topic. I actually have been thinking about this too. I actually think about this rather consistently, to be honest.
Why?
Well, honestly, because I feel a little guilty sometimes. I feel
that's
a
interesting.
little guilty for being as independent as I am.
Mm.
Or I certainly sometimes when I'm feeling a little, I don't know, maybe where I'm feeling a little off, sometimes I wonder, is it a good thing? Because this is where I would naturally go. So for example, I think there's a lot of times where I feel more independent than the average person feels independent.
Mm.
And I'll rely on my own independence in times when maybe it's actually not very helpful for my relationships.
Yeah, that I was going there too. I was how is this actually affecting my relationships? Because I like helping people, and if I refuse all help, what is that causing to the other person in relation to me?
Yes.
Probably a little bit of a ruckus.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I haven't even told you about this. A couple weeks ago, we lost our little wiener dog.
Oh no.
Yeah, Belle.
Sorry to hear
The
that.
Bob. Yeah. But this was a couple weeks ago, and I never said anything to pretty much anyone except the people my family knew. And one of my very best friends in the UK, I sent her a message and just said, "This is what happened. I don't want to talk about it." So not only are you, independent in lots of just functional ways, you are having an emotional independence. Yeah, which I don't really think is probably necessarily the best route.
I will agree with you.
Well, you don't have to be so agreeable. But yeah, and I realized afterwards. So I even said to her, she kept sending me WhatsApps, right? And she's like, "Okay, are you ready yet? How are you doing today?" So she stuck with me. She's also very independent. She knows me very well. And then she said after the crisis part of grieving, then she said, I don't really know if that's particularly healthy. And I was like, shut up.
Let me go through my process.
Shut up. I can do this. I can do this by myself. So yeah, I mean, I'm making light of it, but I think that there is something there. It's like independence can be a very good thing, but I do think there's a shadow side to independence too.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, a shadow side. There, we've had episodes, and you and I actually, talk a lot about the generational differences. Yeah. And obviously these are kind of big old stereotypes, but
yeah.
One of the Gen X traits is independence. And a lot of that stuff comes from like our behaviors come from like our childhood and our upbringing and the way our parents parented us.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of the Gen Xers have this sort of have this independence angle
mentality
to them. Like I have to figure out how to survive on my own because no one else is around.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how we grew.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good way to say that.
It's not like my parents weren't around, but they were definitely...
They weren't out playing with you, trying to make your day great. They were not...
Not like it is today, I feel like, with the kids. So,
no.
Which I always, like as an adult, as now being that kind of adult, I will always like really appreciate it.
Same.
Because if I didn't have all of that, I'd say like long leash when I was a kid, I would have never figured any of this stuff out. And I think like one of the big benefits of being really independent is that you also kind of get the opportunity to be really like creative on how you're going to solve things.
And you're a little more willing to take, I think you're just a little more willing to try different things
take
and to
risks,
step out of the box.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I also think, like if you think about how we were educated, think about school, what did they encourage in school for children, for us? They encouraged doing projects. It was pretty single focused.
Yeah,
very
independent
rarely.
Study.
Independent
I think
study.
I had a class called independent study.
I did too.
Like, what is that?
I actually tried to sign up for that anytime I could.
Don't talk to anyone else and just do some work.
And for the introverts on this pod, it was
awesome.
A wonderful thing. But also for an only child on this pod, it was a great thing. Like I was very used to doing everything by myself.
Oh, could I implement that at work? That sounds awesome. Like you'll get in trouble if you talk. Someone's standing around in the office, and if you talk, you get whacked with a stick.
But like even if you think about school, like how many times did we do group projects versus single projects? It was very rare. I mean, a group project was like,
it was like a special thing. It was like,
we're doing if you can do this.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I had not really remembered that so clearly. That's great.
Yeah. And test taking, single activities, like everything was very, very, very much one voice, one picture, you relying on you. And I think even schools have modified things so much now with more open classrooms. They're doing a lot more team things. They're doing a lot more collaboration. They talk about it more. I just think there was a whole, yes, I think you're onto something with the generational thing. And I do actually, that's almost maybe is it a problem? Because I love it so much. I don't have problems being by myself.
Right.
And when a lot of people are out socializing, even though I'm an extrovert, I don't feel the need to be paired with people multiple times a week and doing things and it isn't that I don't love my friends, but I just don't think like that. Yeah. And it makes me oftentimes wonder if I'm weird.
I don't know. So like Amber always, whenever she's talking about like college experience or talking to college kids or parents of college kids today, she'll always talk about how when she went and traveled in Europe, she did that alone, like solo.
Yeah.
And this idea that like people don't like to go like out to dinner by themselves.
Yeah. Or go to a movie.
By themselves. Right. And she always like points that out as like a positive, like you as a young person should get comfortable enough with yourself and self-reliant enough that you go do those things by yourself.
Yeah.
But that's not a common thing where people are like, oh yeah, I'll just, travel somewhere by myself and just do the whole thing, the whole trip solo.
Right. Well, So yes, I'm with you 100%. So the question is when is it not good?
Right. I can tell you when it's not good.
Me too. You go first. Wait, enter Amber and Mitch. Exit, stage left even.
I'd say it is not good when I rely on that independence instinct so much that I'm like doing way too much workload. And then I start like getting irritated with everybody around me why they're not doing as much as I'm doing.
Oh.
So it like actually starts to foster a bit of like resentment.
Okay. Yeah. That's very interesting.
But when someone asks, "Can I help you?" I say no.
Right.
So that's not fair, right?
No, but you expect them to ask, but you don't actually want them to help.
Yeah.
That's what I just heard.
It kind of like leads to like, well, if like frankly kind of like burnout, right? Like I'm doing so much stuff, I'm getting burnt out, like carrying all this load, but I'm doing it to myself. So it's not fair to be irritated at other people because I don't ask for help or even accept it when it's offered.
That's really interesting. What? I just have a couple questions about that. Just would like to say, JJ just sat back when I said that. What is behind that? What's the story that you tell yourself about that?
That's a good question. I think it's because I do take, I think a lot of my self-image and pride is around being the guy that can do a lot of stuff. Like I like to be the person. And I had this like I'm gonna drop this from my like internal self narrative, but there was like there was this book in software engineering that talked about the 10x programmer, which this is kind of getting into a little bit of like maybe folklore, I'm not sure, but in software engineering, this idea that there's some computer software engineers that are 10 times more productive than others. 10 times. They did a whole study. It was like measured like this group 10 times more productive than this whole other group. Why are these people 10x more productive? And I always took that because that book and that research kind of shaped me. Yeah. Probably when I was like in my 20s as a programmer. I'm like, I am going to be a 10x programmer. That was like my goal is to be a 10x programmer. And it's kind of in me today. Yeah, no matter what I'm doing, I want to be a 10x dad. I want to be a 10x like person at home. I want to be a 10x CEO. I want to be a 10x whatever I'm doing. Right. Which makes me like act a little crazy sometimes.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think there's any judgment behind it. I was just curious because you form at a younger age. That's that you were pretty, you were impressionable about how to create a work ethic at that time when you read that book.
Yep.
So it was telling you a story that somehow also equated to you doing it by yourself, I suppose, right, because programming is.
So right, the 10x mentality coupled with independence.
Yeah.
What does that cause? It causes like me to be like extremely driven, I guess.
Yeah.
But also a little bit psychopathic around like...
Oh, stop judging. I'm not judging.
I'm just using colorful, fun language.
Judgmental, colorful, fun language. Okay, so was the whole premise behind that the reason that they were 10x is because they stayed hyper-focused? What was it?
It was kind of like a focus thing, and it was like, it was all about being in the zone, right? Being in the flow. How do you get yourself in the flow?
Okay.
And when you are in that perfect mental state where everything is clicking, then you become hyper productive.
Oh, I see.
So I think this is probably also keys around my obsession about like mental fitness and even this podcast, right? How are we staying in a state where we're not spinning and ruminating on things and we're in the moment where,
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That's a mystery. 3 years. Maybe we'll figure it out in the next 3 years. This is really interesting to me. I've never thought of this, but you're equating your independence and your solo activity, your solo thoughts, your solo production You're basing it on productivity and sort of like excellence, right? Like that's what I just heard you say. I don't think like that at all. Mine comes from a completely different place.
It's funny. As soon as I have said that now, I'm currently rewiring like a 180 on that. I'm like, that doesn't even make a lot of sense now I said it aloud.
Well, I think it makes perfect sense. I bet you there's a whole bunch of people in this world that do exactly that. I think it makes a huge pile of sense.
I'm not saying there's not that doing that, but you go, and I'm gonna tell you why I don't think it makes that much sense.
Okay.
After.
Okay. So my independence isn't linked with that. My independence is being sovereign in and of myself, because I'm going to say this out loud. And so this is why I was telling you not to be judgy, because I'm trying to really hard not judge myself. The reason I have this feeling of independence is because I don't want to rely on anybody else just in case, just in case they're not going to be there. So that this is again from having.
We're getting on you better lay down. Oh. You better lay down on the couch at this point.
I know.
We're getting in there.
I've already had my espresso this morning, and now I've got a big glass of water. I feel ready. I feel hydrated. But it is interesting. So I have two schools of thought that are really pushing me to stay as independent as I am. Now, I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying that I just realized these are my two schools of thought. That's the first one. It's like, just you have to be able to rely on yourself, because you really shouldn't rely on other people. And I'm using that word shouldn't, air quotes. Okay. That's the first one. Here's the second one. I find myself being independent in a couple of different scenarios in my life. One is when I am feeling unsure. I'm trying to figure something out, right? Then I will go to that. I'll just figure it out myself. Who knows? Nobody knows me like I know me. People, I don't know if people are going to give me sound advice. Like, I trust my own advice. Okay, so I do that. But here's the other place that I do it. So, we talk a lot about, over the years, we've talked about spirituality, and we've talked about, this whole creating energy and being positive, and how do you add to the world, And my philosophy really is, whatever you push out, you're magnifying. So if you're in a bad mood and you aren't cautious about that energy, you spread it around to other people, and it just makes more. Okay. I believe this not just as an individual, but I believe this as a people. Like, we have to be so careful with our energy. And so if there's bad things, like the loss of my little bop, I mean, that was so awful. And I didn't want to push those emotions and that energy to anyone else. I didn't want other people to feel bad like I was feeling. So I almost also do it in my own mind as a protection for others.
For others, yeah.
Yeah, which, again, I don't really think that's particularly healthy, but it's independent thinking is certainly what that is. So it's interesting. And so when you cascade that out to your relationships, like, who are the people that suffer the most from my independence? My spouse, my kids, my family, my best friends, right?
Yeah.
Because at the times when I'm having negativity or not feeling good, I think to myself, oh, don't give that to them too. You need to handle this so that you're not making it worse for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, yeah. When I was going through like all the business partnership stuff a long time ago, I would also do the same thing. I would try to come home and just hold all that emotion independently and not try to like go over it with Amber. And years later, when we were discussing that period of time, she refers to it as the worst time in our marriage. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like protecting you from all of this negative energy and BS.
Right.
And she's like, no, you were being super closed and not letting anyone
unreachable.
Help. Yeah.
Unreachable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in a marriage too, I mean, or in any really significant long-term relationships, it is such a fine line trying to figure out that independence and that dependence. Like, what's the line in that? I remember at our wedding, my grandfather is a minister, and he was part of our wedding, and he was quoting Cahill Gibran, and who is a famous famous person. And it's the whole thing about there are pillars, right? Let there be pillars. Let there be pillars in your relationship. One is you, one is the other person. You need those to stand alone to create strength, but then you need to have pillars that you share.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really difficult sometimes if you're a strong, independent person to share.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. It's a sharing problem. I want to share my toys.
Exactly.
/ emotions.
No. Twinkies. Don't touch my Twinkies.
Yeah, because if you're too, I'd say that there's like three, you could put these into like three buckets. There's like total independence, and then the other side would be total dependence.
Right.
That's the other end of the stick. But in the middle of that stick is interdependence.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Where you have like, like mutual support for each other. Yeah. And it's like more balanced, right?
Yeah. It takes a lot of work to be interdependent or dependent when you are naturally independent. It takes a heck of a lot of work. And I would say sometimes I'm better at it than others.
But there's times where you're better at it than others?
Yeah. And there's times where I'm really bad at it. I don't want to talk. I don't want to. Not gonna. You can't make me.
Do you I'm kind of curious, like in your coaching, in your professional stuff, do you come across, I would imagine a lot of people that are kind of at your C-level coaching, are they mostly this independent type?
Yeah.
It's like a certain personality.
It's a level of assertiveness. Yeah, it's a level of assertiveness that, I can also equate it to that, because that level of assertiveness is sort of attached from a personality perspective to a more strategic way of thinking. And, it takes courage and guts to think ahead without having all the answers. So it's a lot of the times that you'll see that kind of personality in that role.
Yeah.
And they're usually used to being alone in those kinds of thinking. Or, they maybe have one or two thinking partners, and that's it.
It's always the famous thing at once you get a certain level in your career, I always say it's lonely at the top.
Yeah, exactly.
It is very lonely.
Yeah.
So you have to have this level of independence, or else you can't really get through it.
You don't get to that level without a high level of independence.
Yeah.
Most of the time you don't.
Yeah.
Obviously.
What do you think are some things like that we could help do for our kids to help them become more independent?
That's a really good question. I mean, my kids are now 20-somethings, middle 20-somethings. And this is a really interesting thing that happens. Once your kids are launched, by the time they're probably 11 or 12, you've already educated them as much as you're going to. They're not active learners from you.
Your suggestion, give up.
No. At this point, though, from this point forward, it is too late. It is too late. So now you just encourage behaviors that match what you already told them, right? But here's when you've done a good job. And so this is here's a funny answer to your question. Most parents don't really want to do that. They say they do. But then if their kids don't rely on them and call them and do the things all the time, then they start feeling like, oh, I don't have anything to do anymore. I'm not needed anymore as a parent. That's what happens for a lot of us, just our internal dialogues, not what we say on the outside. We would all argue that, oh no, I don't feel like that at all, but that's exactly how we feel. So it is an interesting play, right? It's like we want our children to be independent, but we don't.
That's kind of like hard to let go, right? Yeah, I remember there's at some point, I don't know how old the kids were, but Amber saying something like, wow, the kids don't even need us anymore.
I know.
I feel like awesome.
Oh, big talker.
Yeah, right.
You big talker.
Well, interesting.
I think I think what I'm taking away from this conversation actually is a lot of things to think about that I haven't thought about it like this. Because I feel like now I can maybe assign why I feel guilty sometimes. like just talking this through. It's like, and maybe it's all about how it feels inside when you know that you're stretching too far into independence, like, or the opposite. If you're needing somebody else to make you feel or make you do something or what have you, then that's probably the shadow side going in the opposite direction. But if you are finding that you try to do things yourself and it really doesn't feel right inside, it's just kind of like, it gives you something to think about. It's like, so if you're feeling guilty,
or again,
like for
if
me,
it starts harboring some resentment, because
that's
exactly. The trigger for me. Is just like, as soon as I start feeling resentful that I'm the only one doing things around here, I'm like, all right, okay, that's my over independence kicking in.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
So, and I like that emotional independence that you're talking about. I think we can all like reflect more on that, because and specifically how that affects our relationships with
and I think just creating healthy, right, and just even creating healthy habits around even talking about that a little bit consistently with your partner, or creating some things like, because I have a spouse that is equally independent, if not more so, seriously. So there's always been that play of making sure that there's time built together, because if we didn't think about it, we'd be off to the races and be completely fine, independently.
Yeah.
Like, but then all of a sudden, something doesn't feel right, So I think it's just being aware of what works within your relationships. And if there really is a little more of a stretch, that be more helpful.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, lots to think about. Okay, I'm going to go edit, post, promote this whole podcast independently with nobody else's help.
And I'm going to go and figure out how to push the delete button, since I didn't want to share anything sad.
Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.